The ancient Egyptians believed in many different gods, a bit like the ancient Greeks or Romans. Like those other cultures, the Egyptian gods had a hierarchy, and a head god Ra, who was also the sun god, although sometimes this changed around, and gods like Isis were in charge either way. There was a whole bunch of law, culture, and superstition surrounding these gods. Anubis was the god of the dead, although technically he was the god of the dead, the underworld, mummification, embalming, tombs, and graveyards. His god was to usher souls into the afterlife. Anubis is actually the ancient Greek word for this god. The Greeks arrived in Egyptian around the 7th century BC, and some of the most famous Egyptians, like Cleopatra, were actually of Greek origin. Anubis was originally called Anput or Inpu. The ancient Egyptians were really into making their gods half human, half animal, like Ra, who had the head of a bird, and Sobek, who had the head of a crocodile. Anubis had the head of a jackal, which is a type of animal native to Egypt, a bit like a dog. Let's face it, it will be pretty intimidating to wake up in the afterlife and see that looming over you. Some people think a jackal was chosen as a way to ward off real jackals, who would sometimes cause all sorts of bother. As well as being related to all the gods in some way, Anubis also had a large family of his own, including a wife Anput, sometimes depicted as a jackal or a woman, and a brother Wepwawet, well, like a wet wipe, who was a god of war and often depicted with the head of a wolf, and his daughter Kebechet, who is sometimes a dog but sometimes a snake, must make Christmas very weird. Once the Greeks arrived, they started mixing up their gods and Egyptian gods, which is where Anubis came from, a composite of the Greek messenger and god Hermes and Anubis. What did Anubis do? Like his origin gods, he accompanied souls to the dead. Once you got to the underworld, it was Anubis' job to weigh your heart. Yes, a bit weird. He would place it on a scale opposite a feather called the feather of truth, and if your heart was lighter, you got to go to the underworld, but if it was heavier, a demon would eat it and that would be the end of you. In the myths and stories about the ancient Egyptian gods, Anubis appears a few times. In the myth of Osiris, he's the one who restores Osiris to life after he's murdered by his brother Set. Not very nice of him. Anubis is mostly found at the end of myths, meeting those who have died. While you might not notice, you've definitely seen the figure of Anubis in a lot of wall art and statues from ancient Egypt. He's pretty hard to miss. He was a popular choice for statues and paintings, but also as a charm people might wear around their neck, or as figurines in their houses. He was everywhere. Anubis had a lot of followers. I don't mean on social media, although it was a bit like that. Followers of ancient gods would be referred to as a cult, and the cult of Anubis was basically a religion that worshipped Anubis more than the other gods. They would perform ceremonies and rituals to worship Anubis, and he was especially important in funeral rites. Although this all sounds nice, just don't get on his wrong side, because Anubis had the power to curse you. He'd be especially mad if you were to broke into a tomb and stole its contents. These curses would be generally horrible, so don't annoy Anubis. One of the most famous depictions of Anubis was in the tomb of the famous boy king Tutankhamun, whose burial place was discovered in 1922. An Anubis shrine was found in the tomb, probably to ward off potential grave robbers, and the Anubis statue can now be found in the Cairo Egyptian Museum. Anubis' jackal head was usually black, and he was associated with the color black for many reasons. Firstly, it symbolized death, but it also symbolized regeneration and the swirl of the Nile, which was black and which is where bodies were laid to rest. The gods, like most gods in most stories, were usually fighting with each other over something or another, and they liked to take sides. Anubis was an ally of Osiris, and sometimes depicted as his son or brother. He usually helped Osiris out in stories where he was in trouble, and was the one who brought him back to life. The Book of the Dead isn't actually one book, but a general name for scrolls that contain spells and rituals that would help the dead pass into the afterlife. Anubis and his heart-weighing ritual usually turned up in them, as it was one of the most rituals in the afterlife. One of the most famous books of the dead is at the British Museum in London, after it was discovered in the 19th century. Video games like Assassin's Creed Origins has a segment where you must face Anubis, and he also appears in the film The Mummy Returns. In both of these, he is depicted as quite a creepy figure, although the Egyptians didn't really think of him like that. You might also see the eye of Anubis as a symbol or tattoo. The Egyptians had lots and lots of different deities. In fact, over 1,300. Lots of these gods fell in and out of fashion, but Anubis remained popular throughout time and was also one of the oldest gods, originating between about 6,000 and 3,000 BCE. That's about 8,000 years ago. If you do see an image of Anubis, chances are it's on a tomb or in a cemetery. The ancient Egyptians liked to place him there to ward off or curse tomb raiders, as with the tomb of Tutankhamun. In fact, there is a legend that the people who found his tomb were cursed, maybe by Anubis. One way to meet Anubis and get your heart weight, you had to face a lot of scary things and tricky tasks, a bit like being a character in a video game. You might have to face demons, other gods, and even scary animals like crocodiles and wolves. You would have to answer questions and riddles, also a bit like a video game. And if you got them wrong, these demons and gods could attack you. Sounds very stressful. We might rather play Sonic. Even in today's time, like I said, maybe you've seen a picture before me, because he's still popular in art and culture today. Although he's taken on a rather sinister reputation, the ancient Egyptians did not regard him as a particularly evil or spooky, but because he's associated with death, today he's often portrayed as a scary figure. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, as it really helps me out.